The Duke of Ashbourne was engaged to a woman he did not love, and bound by a promise made before either of them could speak. Then a clergyman's daughter walked into his library by mistake, and 3 weeks before his wedding, he stood at the altar and set fire to the marriage contract. Ashbourne Court, Derbyshire, the last Tuesday of October 1816. The library at Ashbourne was, by long custom, the Duke's room. Everyone in the household understood this without it ever having been said. The morning room was for the housekeeper. The schoolroom was for the boys. The yellow drawing room was for callers his aunt arranged. The library was where Theodore Ashbourne went to be left alone, and the staff arranged themselves around that fact the way water arranges itself around a stone. So when he opened the door at 10:15 and found a woman in the wing chair by the fire, he stopped on the threshold and did not for a full second understand what he was seeing. She had not heard him. She was reading. A small green volume rested in her lap, and one hand turned a page with the absent care of a person who was somewhere else entirely. The morning light fell across her cheek and the edge of her jaw and the plain brown stuff of her gown, and Theodore had time to think, "This is the new governess," before she lifted her eyes and saw him. She rose at once. The book closed in her hand with the small precise sound of a clasp on a jewel case. "Your Grace, forgive me. I was told the library would be empty until 11. It usually is. Mr. Pellew is with the boys this morning. The drawing master. I had thought—" "Yes." She did not move. She also did not apologize twice, which he noticed. "What are you reading?" She turned the book so he could see the spine. The Task, by Cowper. He had read it as a boy. His tutor had been fond of it. His brother had not. "It belongs to the house," she said. "I shall return it at once." "It belongs to a shelf no one has touched in 11 years. Keep it as long as you wish." He stepped into the room. He did not know in that moment that he had decided anything. He only knew that he was not going to ask her to leave, and that this was unusual, and that the unusual thing was happening too quickly to be examined. "I do not know your name," he said. "Hartley, Miss Eleanor Hartley." "Miss Hartley, you have been here—" "6 months, Your Grace." 6 months. Since the end of April. He nodded once. He had been at Ashbourne for the whole 6 months. He had passed her in corridors. He had seen her at a distance crossing the lawn with the boys. He had not, until this morning, looked at her. He saw now that she was perhaps 24, that her hair was the colour of dark honey, that she stood very straight in the way of women who have been told all their lives not to lean on furniture, and that her eyes, grey, with something cool and watchful in them, did not flinch from his. "Forgive me," she said again, "for being where I should not have been." "You are not where you should not have been. The library is for the use of the house. I have simply made it inconvenient by habit." "Then I will not inconvenience you further." She moved towards the door. He did not step out of her way exactly, but he did not step aside either, and she had to pass within a foot of him to reach the corridor. As she did, the book slipped half an inch in her hand, and he caught the title again, gilt on green, The Task. "Miss Hartley." She paused. "My nephews, what do you teach them?" "Whatever they are willing to learn, Your Grace. At present, Latin declensions and the kings of England. James has decided that William the Conqueror was a villain. William has decided that all the Williams were heroes." "And you?" "I have not committed myself." It was almost a smile. Not a smile he could have sworn to. But the corner of her mouth had moved briefly, and his own answered before he was aware of it. "Good day, Miss Hartley." "Your Grace." She left. The door closed. He stood for a moment in the middle of his own library, looking at the chair she had vacated, where the cushion still held the slight indentation of where she had sat. Then he went to the window and looked out at nothing for rather longer than the view warranted. The Duchy of Ashbourne had not, 2 years ago, been Theodore's problem. He had been a younger son in London. He had kept rooms in Albany, a horse he could not really afford, and an arrangement with his elder brother Henry that had suited them both. Henry minded the estate, Theodore minded his own pleasures, and the two of them met 4 times a year for dinner and pretended this constituted being brothers. Then Henry had ridden out one wet March morning on a horse he should not have been riding, and a wall he had jumped 100 times had thrown him, and Theodore had become the 7th Duke of Ashbourne in the time it took a letter to travel from Derbyshire to London. He had loved his brother. He had not loved him well, or often, or in any way Henry would have recognized, but he had loved him, and when he stood in the chapel at Ashbourne and watched the coffin lowered, he had understood for the first time that the older brother who had been impatient with him all his life had also been, in some way, his entire idea of what a man should be. Henry had left 2 sons, James then 6, William then 4. Their mother had died 3 years earlier in childbed with a daughter who had not survived the night. Theodore was their guardian. Theodore was their duke. Theodore was, at 30, suddenly the man who would decide whether they grew up well or badly, and he did not know how to decide. He had taken the title. He had moved to Ashbourne. He had learned the names of the tenants and the rotation of the crops and the disputes of the village. He had done these things competently, because Henry would have done them competently, and Theodore had decided, without ever quite formulating the decision, to live the rest of his life as a passable imitation of his brother. The engagement was part of this. There had been, for as long as anyone could remember, an understanding between Ashbourne and Whitlock. Henry had been intended for Caroline. They had grown up dancing at the same Christmas balls, riding the same hunts, sitting beside each other at the same dinners. When Henry had married elsewhere for love, briefly and bitterly enough that the families had never quite forgiven him for it, the understanding had been, by some quiet conjugation of cousins and aunts, transferred to Theodore. He had not objected. There had been no point in objecting. Caroline was 28, intelligent, well-bred, and as resigned to the arrangement as he was. They had become engaged in March, at the end of the period of mourning. The wedding had been set for mid-December, at Ashbourne's private chapel. It was now late October. There were 7 weeks left. He thought about this less often than a man should have thought about it. His aunt arrived for tea that afternoon. Lady Augusta Crewe was his late father's sister. She had run his mother's household after his mother died, had run Henry's household after Henry's wife died, and was now, at 63, running Theodore's household until he should have a wife to take it from her hands. She did this with an efficiency he admired, and a tongue he did not, and she had appointed herself the manager of his engagement with the same energy she had brought to managing his linen presses. "You will need to write to Caroline before Friday," she said, pouring her own tea because the footman did it wrong. "The Whitlocks expect a letter every week. I have told you this." "I wrote on Monday." "Then you will write again on Friday." "Aunt." "Theodore." She looked at him over the rim of her cup. She had blue eyes that had once been beautiful and were now merely sharp. "You are not in love with her," she said. "No. That is not a defect in the arrangement. It is the arrangement. Your father intended this match. Henry intended this match. Caroline's mother and I have intended this match for 24 years. You will be married in December, and you will be civil to each other, and in 3 years you will have an heir of your own body, and the line will be safe. That is the entire question." "I know." "Then write to her on Friday." "I will." She set her cup down and looked at him with what, in another woman, might have been tenderness. "I do not ask you to be happy, Theodore. I ask you to be useful. Henry was useful. Your father was useful. The estate is not a private matter." "I know that, too." "Good." She rose. She had said what she came to say. At the door she paused. "Who is the woman in the schoolroom?" "Miss Hartley, the new governess." "How new?" "6 months. I do not recall engaging her. Mrs. Birch engaged her on my instruction. Her references were excellent. A clergyman's daughter from Wiltshire. The boys are fond of her." "The boys are fond of the pastry cook. Sentiment is not a qualification. She is also competent." Augusta looked at him a moment longer than was comfortable. Then she said, "Friday, the letter," and went out. Theodore stood by the fire and discovered that his hands were not quite steady. He had not mentioned, and Augusta had not asked, why he should know that the boys were fond of the governess, or that her references were excellent, or that she came from Wiltshire. He had read her file 3 times since April. He had only realized this on the staircase, after she had passed him in the corridor at the end of August and said, "Good morning, Your Grace," in a voice he had thought about for a quarter of an hour afterwards in the saddle-room, alone, without knowing what he was thinking about. This morning in the library, he had finally put a face to the file and the voice to the face, and the result was a kind of quiet alarm that he did not yet have a name for, and that he had every intention of refusing to name. He went to the shelf where Cowper had lived for 11 years. The gap was small and very tidy. He put his hand against the wood beside it briefly, and then he turned away and rang for his secretary, and by 4:30 he was answering letters about drainage in the South Meadow, as though nothing had happened at all. In the schoolroom on the east side of the house, Eleanor Hartley sat at the long table with her 2 charges and watched the rain come down the window in long, uncertain lines. "Amo amas amat," said James, 8 years old, with the patient contempt of a boy who has done this twice already. "Amamus amatis amant," she said. "Amamus amatis amant," said William, 6, who did not entirely know what he was saying but enjoyed the rhythm of it. Good, now I love the dog in Latin. Amo canem, said James. Excellent, William, the dog loves me. William considered this. The dog cannot speak Latin, Miss Hartley. It is a hypothetical dog. What is hypothetical? She set down her pen. A dog that does not exist but might. Then it does not love you. James, who took his role as elder brother seriously, kicked William under the table. William kicked back. Eleanor separated them with the practiced hand of a woman who had been separating brothers since she had a brother of her own, and the lesson continued. She did not all morning think about the library. She did not think about the way the Duke had stopped in the doorway. She did not think about his voice saying, Miss Hartley. She did not think about the fact that he had let her keep the book, or the way he had not stepped aside. She thought about Latin declensions. She thought about her brother Daniel's school fees due in November. She thought about whether the cold she had been fighting for a week was finally going. She thought about a letter from her old neighbour in Wiltshire, which had arrived on Saturday, and which she had not yet answered because the answer required her to admit that she was not coming home for Christmas. She did not think about the Duke. She had had 6 months of practice in not thinking about the Duke, and one morning in a wing chair was not going to undo it. At noon, Mrs. Birch, the housekeeper, came to the schoolroom door and said the Duke would like to see Miss Hartley in the library at 3. Eleanor said, Yes, Mrs. Birch, without looking up, and Mrs. Birch went away, and the rain came down the window, and Eleanor did not think about anything at all for some considerable time. At 3 she presented herself. He was at his desk writing. He did not stand. He gestured to the chair opposite, not the wing chair by the fire, the upright chair near his desk, and she sat. Miss Hartley, I will not keep you long, the boys. Your Grace. My aunt has asked me about your engagement. I find I cannot answer her satisfactorily, because I know less of your situation than I should. I would prefer not to be ignorant about a person responsible for my brother's sons. She inclined her head. You may ask anything you wish, Your Grace. Your father was a clergyman. Yes, the living at Storcombe in Wiltshire. He died 18 months ago. And your mother? 11 years ago, a fever. Brothers, sisters? One brother, Daniel. He is 14. He is at school at Marlborough on a foundation place, but the school fees are not entirely covered, and I send what I can. She said this without colour. It was a fact about her life. The Duke nodded as if it were a fact he had expected. Your education? My father taught me. I had use of his library and the rector's at Salisbury. I read French and a little Greek. I was not sent to school. What did you intend to do with your life? She paused. It was not a question she had been asked before. Employers asked what she could do. They did not ask what she had intended. I do not know that I intended anything, Your Grace. My father was in good health when I was 20. I expected to keep his house until he no longer required keeping. After that, I had not thought. And after his death? There was no living provided for daughters. The new incumbent's family required the rectory. I took a position with a family in Bath for 9 months. They were not kind. I came here in April. Mrs. Birch told me you came with excellent references. Mrs. Birch is generous. Mrs. Birch is not generous. She is exacting. She told me your references were excellent. She has been wrong about a housemaid once in 14 years. Eleanor permitted herself a small private amusement. Then I am very fortunate, Your Grace. He looked at her. The afternoon light was poor, the fire was the better source. It put a copper edge on the side of his face and left the rest in shadow. Are the boys learning? James is. William is learning that learning is a thing he will eventually have to do. I count that as progress. My brother could not be made to learn Latin until he was 11. James is ahead of schedule, then. You knew my brother? Only by what the boys say. James speaks of him often, William less. William was 4. His expression did not change, but he was quiet for a moment longer than the conversation required, and she understood, with the suddenness of an unbidden insight, that the Duke had not yet finished mourning his brother and might never finish, and that no one in this house ever spoke of Henry to him. You are good with them, he said eventually. They are good boys. That is not always sufficient. No, Your Grace, it is not. He nodded. He glanced at the papers on his desk as if to remind himself that he had an excuse for this interview. Thank you, Miss Hartley, that is all. Your Grace. She had almost reached the door when he said, The book. She turned. The Cowper. Have you finished it? Not yet, Your Grace. There is a marker in it. I used it years ago. Page 147, I think. If you find it, you may keep it. It is of no use to me. Thank you. Good afternoon, Miss Hartley. She closed the door behind her and stood for a moment in the corridor with her hand still on the latch. Then she went up to her room, the small one on the second floor, 2 doors from the schoolroom, and took the green volume from the shelf above her washstand and turned to page 147. It was a slip of paper, not a marker. A scrap folded once with 2 lines of a boy's handwriting on it. If I am not back by Michaelmas, I have run away to sea. Tell mother nothing. To have a tea. She refolded it with great care. She placed it back at page 147. She put the book on the shelf. She sat on the edge of her bed for some time, and she did not cry because she was not a woman who cried, but she did not move either. Then she lit her candle and answered her neighbour in Wiltshire, and she did not write about the Duke. The first snow came on the 8th of November. It came in the night, light and dry, and by morning the lawns at Ashbourne were a clean, unbroken white that the boys went out into before breakfast and ruined within 20 minutes. Eleanor stood at the schoolroom window with a shawl around her shoulders and watched them, and behind her the fire was lit, and the day was beginning, and downstairs in the entrance hall a carriage was setting down Lady Caroline Whitlock and her mother for a 4-day visit to discuss the arrangements for the wedding. Eleanor did not see Lady Caroline arrive. She had no reason to. The governess and the future Duchess moved in different parts of the house by different staircases, and would meet only if the future Duchess chose to inspect the schoolroom. Lady Caroline did not inspect the schoolroom. Eleanor heard the carriage on the gravel, recognized the meaning of it without turning around, and continued spelling words with William on a slate. She saw Lady Caroline that afternoon briefly, in the long corridor on the first floor. Eleanor was carrying a folio of the boys' drawings to the morning room for Mrs. Birch's inspection. Lady Caroline was walking with her mother and the Duke, and they had paused by the window at the head of the stairs. Eleanor did not stop. She inclined her head as she passed, to Lady Whitlock, to Lady Caroline, to the Duke, and Lady Caroline returned the courtesy with a small civil smile, and the Duke did not look at Eleanor at all. Eleanor went on down the corridor. She told herself it was correct that he had not looked. She told herself it was the only possible behaviour, and that any other would have been a discourtesy to his future wife. She told herself these things 3 times in the space of 20 steps, and they were all of them perfectly true, and they did not help. In the morning room she gave the folio to Mrs. Birch, who praised William's elephant and frowned at James's map of the Roman Empire, and Eleanor went back up the servants' staircase to the schoolroom and did not allow herself the indulgence of looking out of any window for the rest of the afternoon. That evening the Duke dined with the Whitlocks. There were no other guests, it was a family party. Helena heard the laughter from the dining room through the floorboards above, and she sat in the schoolroom after the boys were in bed, and read Cowper, and at 9:30 she heard a footman on the back stairs and the rustle of skirts in the corridor, and Lady Caroline's voice, low and quite kind, saying, "Thank you, that will do," and a maid's voice answering, "Yes, my lady," and a door closing somewhere along the family corridor. Eleanor closed the book. She did not place the slip of paper at page 147 this time. She placed it inside the front cover, beneath the marbled end paper, where it would not be seen by anyone but her. In the library 2 nights later, the Duke poured himself a brandy he did not particularly want, and stood by the fire with it, and looked at the gap on the 3rd shelf. He had not exchanged 10 words with Eleanor Hartley in a fortnight. He had made very sure of that. He had altered his routes through the house. He had told Mrs. Birch he did not require reports from the schoolroom. He had spent the entire Whitlock visit being the man his aunt and the world expected him to be, and he had succeeded, and he had not slept well in 8 nights. There was a knock at the door. "Come!" It was Caroline. She closed the door behind her. She did not sit. She was in a dark blue dressing gown over her nightdress, and her hair was down her back in a loose plait, and she looked tired in the way of a woman who has decided something. "Theodore." "Caroline, I cannot sleep." "Brandy?" "No, thank you." She stood by the fire. He stood at the desk. The room between them was very still. "I have had a letter from Edmund," she said. He did not pretend not to know which Edmund. "He is well?" "He is in Lisbon. He expects to be home in the spring." "That is good news." "Theodore." She looked at him. There was no plea in it. There was no shame. There was a clarity that he had always respected in her, and that he was at this moment frightened of. "I will marry you in December," she said. "I have promised I will not break the promise, but I want you to know, because we have always been honest with each other, and I will not have a marriage that begins with a lie between us. I want you to know that I love him. I have loved him for 4 years. He does not know it. He will never know it. I will be a good wife to you, Theodore. I will run your house, and I will bear you children, and I will not betray you ever in word or in deed. But I am telling you now, because I want one person in the world to know, and the person I want to know is the man I am marrying." He looked at her. He did not for some long moment know what to say. He said, "Caroline, do not pity me." "I do not pity you." "Good." She nodded once as if a piece of business had been concluded and turned to go. At the door she paused. "I do not ask you whether there is anyone you love, Theodore. I do not need to know. I only wanted to say my own piece. Good night." "Good night, Caroline." She left. He stood for a long time in the library. He drank the brandy. He looked at the gap on the third shelf. Then he went to his desk and wrote a letter to his solicitor in London. And he tore it up before he had finished the second sentence, and he put his head in his hands and sat for a great while without moving at all. The visit ended. The Whitlocks returned to Hampshire. The wedding was 4 weeks away. The house began to dress itself for it. The hall was scrubbed. The chapel was opened. It had not been used in nearly 2 years since Henry's funeral, and the chaplain came up from the village to walk through the order of service. Garlands were ordered from the hothouses. The cook spoke of nothing else. 2 girls came up from the village to help the housemaids, and they whispered in the back stairs, and Eleanor passed them once and heard "the governess," and a small laugh that was cut off when she came round the corner. She did not turn back. She kept walking. She knew what the back stairs said about everything in this house, and she had decided 6 months ago never to listen. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, the 2nd week of November, that she walked into the library to return the cowper, and found the Duke at his desk with his coat off. She stopped on the threshold. "Forgive me, Your Grace, I thought you were at Hartfield." "I returned an hour ago." "I will come back." "No, stay." She did not stay. She stood in the doorway holding a book she had finished, and a decision she had not entirely made. "I came to return this," she said. "I have finished it." "I told you to keep it." "I would prefer to return it." He looked at her. He set down his pen. "Miss Hartley, come in, close the door." She closed the door. She did not know whether the closing was correct or incorrect. She did it because he had told her to. She set the book on the corner of his desk. She did not look at him. "You found the marker," he said. "Yes." "It was written when I was 11. "I suppose so." "I never did run away to sea." "No, Your Grace. I did walk to the village and back, and Mrs. Pell at the inn gave me a sausage, and I returned in time for tea, and no one ever knew." She permitted herself the smallest smile. "Then your secret has held for 21 years." 22. 22. He stood. He came round the desk. He did not approach her. He stopped at the corner of it, 2 yards from her, but he stood, and the standing was somehow more than sitting had been. "Why are you returning the book, Miss Hartley?" She looked at him then. "Because I should not have it, Your Grace." "Why?" "You know why." He did not pretend that he did not. He said very quietly, "Yes." The fire moved in the grate. A coal settled. Outside, somewhere far off in the park, a dog barked twice and stopped. "Miss Hartley." "Please do not, Your Grace." "I have not said anything." "I know, please do not." He was silent. She picked up the book again. She held it against herself, both hands, as if the green binding were a thing that might keep her warm. "I am very grateful for your kindness," she said. "I am grateful for the post. I am grateful that you have allowed me the use of this room, which I should not have entered, and grateful that you have spoken with me about the boys, which has been a pleasure. I am grateful. That is all I have permission to be." "Permission from whom?" "From the world, Your Grace, from the house, from you, from my own sense, which is the loudest of them." "Eleanor." He said her name. He had not said her name before. He said it the way a man says a thing he has been saying privately for some time, and the saying of it aloud was the breaking of a discipline. She looked at him. Her grey eyes did not flinch. They never had. "Your Grace," she said, "you are to be married in 3 weeks and 4 days. I am the governess to your nephews. You have a duty. I have a position. There is no room in either for whatever you were about to say to me. I beg you, for the sake of both of us, but more for the boys who love you and need you to be the man you are pretending to be, do not say it." He did not say it. He stood very still. She watched him take the request and hold it and not put it down. "I will not say it," he said after a long moment. "You have my word." "Thank you. But I will not unknow it." "No, Your Grace, nor I." She placed the book carefully on the desk. She inclined her head. She went out of the room. She closed the door behind her. She walked the length of the corridor and down the back stairs and into the schoolroom, and sat at the long table and looked at the slate where William had been practicing his letters that morning. The letters spelled dog, cat, rat, sun. She put her hands flat on the slate and pressed down on it, hard until her palms hurt, and then she lifted them away and saw that her hands had wiped out rat and sun. She picked up the chalk and rewrote them. She did not cry. She had not cried since her father died. She was not going to begin now 18 months later, over a man she could not have and had never asked for. She rewrote rat and sun, and she went to find William, and she did her work. The rumor began, as far as anyone afterwards could discover, with one of the village girls. It was the Tuesday Eleanor had returned the book. The girl had been in the corridor outside the library, polishing the brass on a hall table that did not need polishing, and she had heard nothing. The door had been closed, and the voices inside had been low. But she had seen Miss Hartley come out, and she had seen the way Miss Hartley walked away down the corridor, and she had drawn a conclusion that was both wrong in its particulars and not entirely wrong in its substance. She told the second housemaid. The second housemaid told the still-room maid. The still-room maid told her sister, who worked in the village. By Thursday it was in the kitchen at the rectory. By Friday it was in the post office. By Saturday, Lady Augusta Crewe heard it from her own lady's maid, who had heard it from Mrs. Birch's niece, who had heard it from the second housemaid, and the chain had grown a great many flowers in the telling. Augusta did not at first do anything. She sat in her bedroom at the Dower House and considered what she had been told, and she struck out the parts that were plainly invention, and she was left with a residue she did not like. A governess, a library, a closed door, the Duke saying Eleanor. She had been managing the affairs of the Ashbourne family for 40 years. She had buried 2 brothers, a sister-in-law, a nephew, and a nephew's wife. She had seen the family come within a breath of ruin twice, and brought it back both times by force of will and a very accurate sense of what mattered. She was not a romantic. She was not a cruel woman. She was a woman who understood with the clarity of a surgeon what would happen to a duke who jilted Lady Caroline Whitlock 3 weeks before the wedding for the governess of his nephews. She ordered her carriage for the following morning. She drove to Ashbourne. She did not announce herself. She walked into the library where her nephew was reading a report from his land agent, and she closed the door behind her. "Theodore, tell me at once that I have been lied to." He set down the report. "About what, Aunt?" "About the governess." He looked at her. He had had 3 days to prepare for this conversation. He had not in any of them prepared for it. "Tell me what you have heard." "That is not the question. The question is whether what I have heard is true." "Aunt." "Theodore, what have you heard?" She told him. He listened. When she had finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "None of that is true. Miss Hartley has behaved with perfect propriety from the day she entered this house. I will not have her name spoken in the village or in this room in any manner that suggests otherwise. Is that understood? It is the question I asked you that I want answered, not the question you wish I had asked." "What question?" "Whether you love her." He did not answer. Augusta sat down. She had not meant to sit. She sat anyway because she was 63 and the answer he had not given her had taken some of her strength. "Theodore." "Yes." "Theodore, listen to me. I do not care what you feel. I have never cared what any man in this family felt, because feeling has never saved this family from anything, and it will not save you. You will marry Caroline Whitlock in 3 weeks. You will be civil to her. You will give her children. You will keep your governess if you must, although I would advise dismissing her with a year's wages and a reference, because she cannot remain in this house once you are married, and the kindest thing is to spare her the slow expulsion. You will be a duke. You will be Henry's brother. You will raise his sons. You will do these things because there is no one else to do them, and because the consequence of not doing them is the ruin of 3 families and a woman of 28 who has done nothing to deserve it. Do you understand me?" "I understand you." "Tell me you will do it." He looked at her. He looked at his aunt, who had been the closest thing to a mother he had known since he was 12, and who had never asked him for anything in her life that was not also a request on behalf of someone else. He said, "I will think on what you have said." "Theodore." "I will think on it, Aunt. That is all I will promise this morning." She rose. She had received worse answers in her life, and she had received them more gracefully than this, but she had not received them from this nephew, and she was tired, and she went to the door. At the door she paused. "If you do this thing, Theodore, if you break it, I will not forgive you. I want you to know that before you decide. I have forgiven a great deal in this family. I will not forgive this." "I know, Aunt." "Good." She went out. He sat at his desk for a long time, not reading the report. Then he rang for his secretary and dictated 3 letters and cancelled an appointment in the village, and he went out into the park alone, in his greatcoat, with no dog and no groom, and he walked until the sun went down. When he came back, he went up the back stairs, not the front, and he stood for a moment in the corridor outside the schoolroom where the light still showed beneath the door, and he heard Eleanor Hartley's voice, very quietly, reading to the boys before bed. She was reading Cowper. He stood with his hand on the wall and he listened until she finished the page, and then he went down to his rooms without speaking to anyone, and he sent word to Mrs. Birch that he would not require dinner. The morning after his aunt's visit, Theodore did not come down to breakfast. He sent word that he was unwell. He was not unwell. He sat at the writing table in his bedroom with a sheet of paper in front of him and a pen in his hand, and he did not write a single word for 2 hours. At 11 he rang for his valet and dressed and went down to the library, and he wrote to his solicitor in London, and this time he did not tear the letter up. He sealed it. He gave it to a footman to take to the post. He stood at the window afterwards and watched the man walk down the gravel drive with the letter in his hand, and he understood that he had begun something he did not yet know how to finish. Then he went to find Eleanor. She was not in the schoolroom. The boys were with their drawing master. She was in the small parlour at the back of the house where the governess was permitted to sit when she was not required elsewhere, and she was mending a tear in one of William's shirts because she had taken on small tasks like this without asking, and Mrs. Birch had not objected because the girl who normally did them had a sick mother in the village. He stood in the doorway. She did not see him at first. She was bent over the work, and the morning light from the window caught the side of her face, and he stood and looked at her for perhaps 3 seconds before she felt him there and looked up. She set the shirt aside. She rose. She did not say, "Your Grace." She waited. "Miss Hartley, walk with me." "Your Grace, Outside, in the park. I'm not asking you into a room with a closed door. I'm asking you to walk where the gardeners can see us, and where any one of the housemaids may watch from any window in this house. I'm asking nothing that the village cannot witness if it cares to." She looked at him. She said, "I will fetch my shawl." They walked out through the side door and across the lawn to the gravel path that ran between the south terrace and the lake. It was cold. The trees were bare. The grass was brown, and the lake was the colour of pewter, and a heron stood on the far bank, motionless, watching the water. He did not speak for the first 50 yards. When he did, he said, "My aunt was here yesterday." "Yes." "You knew?" "Mrs. Birch sent word to me last night. She did not say what was said. She said only that her ladyship had been to see you, and that I should be careful with my comings and goings. Mrs. Birch is a kind woman. Mrs. Birch is a careful woman. They are different." He looked at her sideways. "You have a low opinion of kindness, Miss Hartley. I have a high opinion of it. I am only careful not to mistake other things for it." They walked on. He said, "There is a rumour in the village." "I suppose there would be." "You knew?" "For your Grace, I have lived in 3 households as a working woman. There is always a rumour. There was a rumour in Bath about me and the master of the house, who was 64 and whom I had once corrected on a point of Latin. There was a rumour in Stockholm about me and the new curate, who was engaged to my cousin. There will be a rumour about me wherever I go, because a woman in my position is a thing the world has not decided what to do with, and the easiest thing to do with her is to invent a story. I am not surprised. I am only sorry that this time the story has reached your aunt." He stopped walking. "And me? Is there a story about us?" She did not stop walking immediately. She took 2 more steps, and then she stopped, and she turned, and she looked at him. "Your Grace." "Eleanor, do not." "I have not said it." "You are about to." "Yes." She closed her eyes. It was the first time he had seen her do anything like flinch. "I asked you not to," she said, "in the library. I asked you, and you gave me your word." "I have not said it. I am not going to say it. I am going to ask you a question, and I am going to ask it once, and I am going to abide by whatever you answer. Will you allow me the question?" She opened her eyes. She said yes. "If I were not engaged to Caroline Whitlock, if I were not the Duke of Ashbourne, if I were a man you had met at a country assembly with 200 a year and a respectable profession, would your answer to me be different from the answer you gave me in the library?" She looked at him for a long time. She said, "That is not a fair question, Your Grace." "It is not, I know. Because you are engaged to Caroline Whitlock, because you are the Duke, because you are not a man at a country assembly, the hypothetical man is not you. The answer about him does not signify. It signifies to me." She was silent. The heron on the far bank lifted itself slowly into the air and flew off down the lake with a long, heavy wing beat, and they both watched it go, and when it was gone, she looked back at him. She said very quietly, "Yes, it would be different." He did not move. He did not speak. She said, "And now you know, and now you will not say anything you cannot unsay, and we will walk back to the house, and you will go in by the front door, and I will go in by the side, and we will both of us go on with our lives, because that is the only thing two adults in our positions are permitted to do. Will you agree to that, Your Grace?" He looked at her. He said, "Eleanor." She said, "Theodore, please." It was the first time she had said his name. She had not meant to. She heard herself say it, and she saw his face when she said it, and she understood that she had given him something she had not intended to give. He took one step towards her. He did not touch her. He stopped a foot away and he looked at her and he said, "I have done one thing this morning that I cannot undo. I wrote to my solicitor in London. He will be here within the week. I have not decided what I will say to him when he arrives. I have only made sure that he is on the road, so that I cannot pretend I have not been thinking what I have been thinking. I am telling you this because I gave you my word in the library that I would not say anything, and I am keeping that word. But I am telling you that I have thought it, so that you may know, so that you are not the only person in this who has been carrying it alone." She did not answer at first. She said, "Theodore, you will ruin yourself, you will ruin Caroline, you will ruin the boys, you will ruin me. You cannot do this thing." "I know." "Then do not." "I do not know yet whether I will. I am telling you what I have done." She looked at him. She did then what she had sworn for 6 months she would not do. She lifted her hand. She put it against the front of his greatcoat, flat above his heart, and she felt the wool of the coat and the linen beneath it, and the warmth of him, and the beat of him, very fast, and she stood there with her hand on him for the space of perhaps 4 seconds, and she looked up at his face, and he looked down at hers, and neither of them moved. He bent his head. He kissed her. It was not a long kiss. It was not the kiss of a man who had practiced it. It was the kiss of a man who had been refusing it for 6 months, and had finally stopped refusing, and it was given carefully, almost formally, and it was returned by a woman who had also been refusing it, and who had run out of reasons. Then she stepped back. She took her hand from his chest. She put it to her own mouth briefly, and then she lowered it. She said, "We must go back to the house now, Your Grace." "Eleanor." "We must go back to the house, please." They walked back. They did not speak. At the side door she did not look at him. At the front steps he did not look at her. She went up the back stairs to the schoolroom, and she sat at the long table, and she pressed her hands against the wood until her hands stopped shaking. And then she went to find the boys because their drawing lesson was finishing, and they would be hungry. In the library the Duke poured himself a brandy and did not drink it. He stood at the window and watched the gravel drive, and he saw in his mind the footman walking down it that morning with the letter to London in his hand, and he understood for the first time with absolute clarity that he had not written that letter as a man considering a choice. He had written it as a man who had already made one. The solicitor arrived 4 days later. Mr. Whitcomb had been the family's man of business for 30 years. He was 68, thin, white-haired, and impossible to surprise. He had drawn up the marriage settlement between His Grace and Lady Caroline Whitlock in March. He had it with him now, in a leather folio, because His Grace had requested it in his letter, and Mr. Whitcomb had brought everything His Grace had asked for, and a great deal more, because that was his habit. He was shown into the library at 11 on a Saturday morning. The Duke was waiting, the door was closed, the fire was lit. There were no servants in the room. "Your Grace." "Whitcomb, sit, have you the settlement?" "I have." Mr. Whitcomb placed the leather folio on the desk and opened it. Inside, on heavy parchment, was the marriage settlement, the dower provisions, the trusts for any future children, the jointure, the inventory of plate and books, and the Whitlock lands at Combe Hartfield that would pass into the Ashbourne estate at the wedding. It was signed by the Duke and by Lord Whitlock. It was witnessed. It awaited only the marriage itself to take effect. The Duke looked at it. "Whitcomb, I asked you to come here to advise me on the consequence of an act I am considering. I have not yet committed to it. I require your honest counsel. I do not require your approval. Do you understand the distinction?" "I do, Your Grace." "Good. If I were to break the engagement with Lady Caroline Whitlock, formally by letter to her father today, what would be the consequence? Mr. Whitcomb did not blink. He had been waiting on the road from London for 2 days to be asked some version of this question. He had assumed it would be asked. He had prepared his answer. Your Grace, there is no legal consequence. An engagement is not enforceable in law. There would be no breach of promise action. The settlement is not in force until the marriage is solemnized. You would, however, be obliged to return certain gifts. The diamonds from your grandmother, currently in Lady Caroline's keeping at Hartfield, the miniature she had taken for you in the spring, those would be customary returns. And the lands, the Combe-Hartfield estate, would remain Lord Whitlock's. They were conditional upon the marriage they have not yet conveyed. Then there is no financial penalty. None to you, Your Grace. Considerable to others, but none to you. Define others. The Whitlock family will suffer. Lady Caroline's reputation will suffer. Though less than would once have been the case, she is of an age and standing where the world will be more curious than censorious. Your aunt will suffer in her standing among her acquaintance. The estate's relations with the Whitlock family, 24 years of intention, 3 generations of friendship, will be severed. You may expect that the Whitlocks will not receive you. You may expect that several of the older families in this county will not receive you. You may expect that your aunt will not speak to you for some considerable time. Will I be ruined? You are the Duke of Ashbourne. You cannot be ruined. You can only be unpleasant to know for a season. That is the privilege of your rank, and I say it neither in approbation nor in disgust. And the woman? Your Grace? The woman I am considering. If she were to enter this house as my wife, what would happen to her? Mr. Whitcomb paused. He said, May I ask her position, Your Grace? She is the governess to my nephews, a clergyman's daughter from Wiltshire. No fortune, no connections of consequence. Mr. Whitcomb nodded slowly. She will not be received in this county for at least 2 seasons. She will not be received in London for at least 1. She will be the subject of every dinner conversation between Derby and Bath for 6 months. She will be called an adventuress in print, possibly more than once. She will require the protection of the Ashbourne name and your personal escort at every public occasion for at least a year, and even with that protection she will suffer. She is, I assume, a woman of intelligence. Yes. Then she has already calculated this and has, I assume, refused you. The Duke looked at him. He said, She has not yet been asked. I see, Your Grace. There was a silence. Then Mr. Whitcomb said gently, and Mr. Whitcomb was not a gentleman, and the Duke heard it, Your Grace, I have served this family 30 years. I served your father. I served your brother. I will tell you what I would not tell either of them because they did not ask me. The question is not whether you can do this thing, you can. The question is whether the woman, knowing what I have just told you, will permit you to. If she will, then you have my counsel that the act is survivable. If she will not, then you have my counsel that you should not press her. She will be the one who pays. You will only be inconvenient to know. The Duke nodded. He said, Thank you, Whitcomb. Your Grace. Leave the settlement. I will keep it for the present. Your Grace. The solicitor rose and bowed and went out, and the Duke sat alone with the marriage settlement on the desk in front of him for some considerable time. Then he folded it carefully with its leather folio and locked it in the lower drawer of his desk. The wedding was in 14 days. He did not see Eleanor for those 14 days. He made sure of it. She made sure of it. They passed each other once in a corridor on the Tuesday after the kiss, and she inclined her head and said, Your Grace. And he said, Miss Hartley, and they did not look at each other, and they went on. The house filled. The Whitlocks arrived 3 days before the wedding. Caroline embraced him in the hall and said, Theodore, and looked into his face and said nothing else, and he understood that she had seen. He did not know how much. He did not know whether she had heard the rumor or only read his face, but she had seen and she did not ask, and he loved her, briefly and entirely, for not asking. His aunt did not speak to him except on matters of business. The chapel was prepared. The chaplain came up from the village twice. The garlands arrived from the hothouses. The cake was made and iced. Eleanor was kept to the schoolroom and the servants' staircase, and her own small room on the 2nd floor, and she did not eat in the hall, and she did not walk in the park, and she taught the boys their Latin and their kings, and she wrote, at last, the letter to her brother that she had been meaning to write for a month, and she did not write about the Duke. On the morning of the wedding, she dressed the boys in their best coats and walked them down to the side door of the chapel, where Mrs. Birch was waiting to take them to the front pew. James was solemn. William wanted to know if there would be cake. Eleanor knelt to straighten William's collar and said, "Yes, there will be cake, but you must be very good until after the service." William said, "Will you be in the chapel, Miss Hartley?" She said, "No, I shall be in the schoolroom, but I shall hear the bells and I shall be very happy for your uncle." She watched them walk away with Mrs. Birch, and then she went back up the path to the house, and she went up to the schoolroom, and she sat at the long table with the green volume of Cowper in her hands, and she waited for the bells. The bells did not ring. In the chapel the assembly stood. Caroline came up the short aisle on her father's arm. She was in pale grey silk and her grandmother's pearls. She walked steadily. She did not look at her mother in the front pew. She did not look at Lady Augusta in the second. She looked at Theodore, who was standing at the altar with the chaplain. And she walked towards him, and she did her duty, and she did not falter once. The chaplain began. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered together here in the sight of God, and in the face of this congregation to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The Duke turned his head. He looked at the chaplain. He looked at Caroline. He looked at the front pew where James sat between Lady Augusta and William, and where William was swinging his legs. He said very quietly, "Stop." The chaplain stopped. The assembly went very still. "Mr. Pellow, forgive me, I cannot do this." The chaplain looked at him. He said, Your Grace, "I cannot do this. I will not do this. I am very sorry." He turned to Caroline. Caroline was looking at him. She had not in 28 years ever been looked at the way the assembly was now looking at her, and she stood at the altar in her grandmother's pearls, and she looked at Theodore Ashbourne, and her face, for an instant only, before the discipline of a lifetime closed over it, showed not horror, not shame, not anger, but a flash of pure, helpless, unbelieving relief. He saw it. The chaplain did not. The assembly did not. Lady Augusta in the second pew possibly did. But Theodore saw it, and it was the thing that allowed him to do the next thing. He said, "Caroline, forgive me." She said very quietly, "Theodore, walk away. You are not bound. You have never been bound. I am sorry that it has taken me until this moment to say so." He turned to the chaplain. He said, "The settlement, Mr. Pellow, is it here?" Mr. Whitcomb rose from the third pew. He had the leather folio. He brought it forward without speaking because he had known on the road from London 10 days ago that this was going to happen, and he had been a solicitor too long to be embarrassed by it. The Duke took the folio. He opened it. He removed the parchment. He held it in his hands, and he looked at it once, and then he turned to the altar, where the great candle burned in its tall brass stand to the right of the cross. He put the corner of the parchment to the flame. The parchment caught. It burned slowly at first, and then faster, and the flame climbed up the document, and the seal melted and ran red down the side of it, and the Duke held it until the flame reached his fingers, and then he turned and laid the burning paper on the stone of the altar step and let it burn out. No one moved. The chaplain said nothing. Lady Augusta said nothing. Lord Whitlock, Caroline's father, stood in the front pew with his mouth open and said nothing. The 30-odd guests in the chapel, county neighbours, 2 cousins from Yorkshire, the Whitlock relations, stood and watched the parchment burn down to a black curl on the altar step, and no one spoke. The Duke turned to Caroline. He said, "Lady Caroline, I release you from any obligation you have ever had to me or to this family. You owe us nothing. You are free to marry where you will. I wish you, with all my heart, the happiness I have been too great a coward to wish you until this morning." He took her hand. He bowed over it. He kissed it formally with all the assembly watching, and then he released it and stepped back. Caroline looked at him. She said in a voice that carried very clearly down the chapel, "Thank you, Your Grace. I accept your release. I wish you with all my heart the same." She turned. She walked on her father's arm back down the aisle of the chapel. At the door she paused, and she looked back and she smiled at Theodore Ashbourne, a small, dignified, real smile, and then she went out into the cold December air, and her father went out after her, and her mother went out after them, and the Whitlock relations went out after her mother, and the assembly began in stunned silence and small disordered groups to follow. Theodore did not move. He stood at the altar and watched them go. His aunt was the last to leave the pew. She did not look at him. She walked down the aisle without speaking and went out into the day, and her carriage was at the door, and she got into it, and she was driven away to the Dower House, and she did not speak to him for 8 months. When the chapel was empty, Theodore looked at the black curl of paper on the altar step. The chaplain, who had not moved, said quietly, "Your Grace, the bells—" "Do not ring them." "No, Your Grace. The Duke walked out of the chapel and up the path to the house alone in the morning sun, and the bells did not ring, and in the schoolroom on the second floor a woman who had been waiting for them sat with a green volume of Cowper in her hands, and slowly understood that they were never going to. The house emptied within 24 hours. The Whitlocks left before nightfall. The Yorkshire cousins followed in the morning. The county neighbours did not stay for the breakfast that had been prepared. The cook stood in her kitchen at noon, looking at the cake she had iced for 3 days, and she sat down on a stool and put her apron over her face and wept. Less for the cake than for the disgrace, and Mrs. Birch poured her a glass of cooking sherry and told her that the household would continue, and that she should pull herself together. By the second evening, Ashbourne Court contained only the regular staff, the boys, Eleanor Hartley and the Duke. He did not send for her. She did not go to him. She came down to dinner in the servants' hall as she always had. The governess at Ashbourne had a place at the upper end of the table, between the steward and the housekeeper, and she ate what was put in front of her, and she said yes and no when she was spoken to, and she did not lift her eyes from her plate more than was civil. Mrs. Birch did not speak to her of the wedding. The steward did not speak to her of it. No one spoke to her of it. She felt as she sat there the precise weight of what the house had not yet decided about her, and she ate her supper and did not weep, and she went up to her room afterwards and sat by her small fire and read 3 pages of Cowper without taking in a single line. On the third morning, a note was brought to her by Mrs. Birch herself. It said, "Miss Hartley, I shall be in the library at 11 if you can spare the time. I will not press you to come. A." She read it twice. She put it on her washstand. She finished the boys' arithmetic lesson at 10:30. She went up to her room and changed her collar, the plain one for the better one, and then back to the plain. And she went down the back stairs and along the corridor and to the library door. And she stood outside it for the space of 2 breaths, and she knocked. "Come!" She went in. He was at the window. He turned when she entered. He looked tired in a way she had not seen before, even in the months when she had watched him without permission across rooms. He looked like a man who had not slept for 3 nights, and who had spent those nights making the same decision over and over, and arriving at the same answer. He said, "Miss Hartley." She said, "Your Grace." "Thank you for coming." "I should not have refused." "You might have. You are not bound to come when I send for you. You are a free woman in this house. You have always been a free woman in this house, although neither of us has spoken as though it were so." She did not answer that. He said, "Sit, if you will." She sat. He sat opposite her, not behind the desk this time, but in the chair across from her with no desk between them. He looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked at her. He said, "I am going to ask you to marry me. Before I do, I am going to tell you exactly what marrying me will cost you, because Mr. Whitcomb has told me, and I will not have you accept me without knowing. May I do that?" She said yes. He told her. He told her about the county. He told her about the season in London. He told her about the dinner conversations and the print press and the word adventurous. He told her about his aunt, who would not speak to him, and who would certainly not speak to her, and who might in time come round but who might not. He told her that the Whitlocks would not receive her, and that several of the great houses of Derbyshire would not receive her, and that she would be required, for at least a year and possibly longer, to bear all of this without complaint, and largely without sympathy. He told her that he would protect her in every way he could, but that there were some things his name could not protect her from, and that those things would fall on her and not on him, because that was how the world was made. He told her last of all that the boys would be hers, that James and William would call her aunt at first, and then in time perhaps mother, although he would not press them, that she would have the running of the schoolroom and the running of the house and the running of his own life if she would take it, that he would not pretend the running of these things would be easy, but that he would not undertake any part of it without her counsel for as long as she chose to give it. He said all of this in a flat, steady voice without ornament, like a man reading out a contract. When he had finished, he said, "Eleanor, knowing all of this, will you marry me?" She did not answer at once. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, and she looked at him. She looked at the man she had refused in the library, and the man who had walked her by the lake, and the man who had kissed her, and the man who had stood at an altar and burned a settlement in front of his family and his county, and she looked at the lines around his mouth and the tiredness in his eyes. And she thought about her brother Daniel and his school fees, and her own small room on the second floor, and the 6 months she had spent training herself not to feel what she had felt every time she heard his voice in a corridor, and she said, "No, Your Grace." He went very still. He said, "Eleanor." She said, Not yet, I have not said no, I have said not yet, listen to me, please. He listened. She said, I will not marry you in this house in this month in the shadow of what you did 3 days ago. I will not be the woman the county sees you marry within a fortnight of jilting Caroline Whitlock. I will not give them that story. I will not give it to your aunt, who deserves better than to have her worst fear confirmed in the first month. I will not give it to Caroline, whose dignity you preserved at the altar, and whose dignity you must continue to preserve in the manner of what comes next. I will not give it to James and William, who must not be told for the rest of their lives that their uncle married their governess in haste. And I will not give it to myself, because if I marry you in this month, I will spend the next 20 years asking whether I would have married you in any other month, and I will not have that question in my house. He looked at her. He said, What are you asking? I'm asking you to send me away. Eleanor! Listen, I'm asking you to send me away with a year's salary and the best reference you have ever written, and I'm asking you to arrange a respectable position for me, through Mr. Whitcomb, who I trust to be discreet, somewhere I am not known. I am asking for 1 year. 1 year in which the county may say what it wishes and find over time that there was no governess in your house for it to talk about, because the governess left and the Duke remained alone, and the engagement that was broken for reasons that were the Duke's own. 1 year in which you may demonstrate by your conduct that you broke that engagement because you should not have entered it, and not because you had a woman waiting upstairs. 1 year in which I may live, somewhere quiet, and consider whether the woman I will be when I come back is the woman I wish to be. At the end of that year, Your Grace, if you still wish to ask me what you have asked me this morning, write to me, and I will give you my answer. He did not speak for a moment. He said, A year. A year. Eleanor, a year is a great while. It is not so great. I have been at Ashbourne 6 months. I would have stayed another 1.5 years before I sought another post. A year is what the situation requires. It is not punishment, Theodore. It is preservation of you, of me, of what may exist between us. I will not begin my life with you by destroying yours. He looked at her for a long time. He said, And if I cannot wait a year? She said, Then you were not the man I thought you were, and we will both be spared the discovery later. He took a breath. He said, Mr. Whitcomb is still in the county. I will speak to him this afternoon. He will find a position for you. Where would you wish to go? She said, Somewhere by the sea. I have never seen the sea. He almost smiled. He said, Then by the sea. He rose with her. She said, I shall stay until Mr. Whitcomb has made the arrangements. I shall continue to teach the boys until the day I leave. I shall not see you alone again in this house, Your Grace. Will you allow me that? He said, I will allow you anything. She said, Then do not write to me before the year is out. Not once, not a line. The year must be a full year, or it is not a year. I will not write. Thank you. She moved towards the door. At the door she paused with her hand on the latch, as she had paused the first time he had asked her about the book. She turned. She looked at him across the room. She said, Theodore, for the rest of my life, whatever happens, I will remember what you did in the chapel. I will remember it not for what it was, but for what it cost you to do, and for the fact that you did it because you saw me. No one had ever seen me before. Whatever else is true between us, that is true, and a year will not change it. She went out. He stood in the middle of the library, and he did not move for a great while, and then he went to his desk and rang for his secretary, and began the work of arranging her life. She left Ashbourne on the 3rd of January 1817. Mr. Whitcomb had found her a position with a Mrs. Tarrant in Lyme Regis, the widow of a naval captain, who required a companion governess for her 2 young daughters, and who knew nothing of Ashbourne Court, except that the Duke's solicitor recommended Miss Hartley in the warmest terms, and that Miss Hartley's references were exemplary. The salary was good. The house was small, and looked over the sea. Mrs. Tarrant was kind in the way Eleanor had once told Theodore she did not trust, and turned out after some weeks to be kind in the other way as well. James cried when she left. William did not cry because William had not understood, but William said that he wished Miss Hartley would come back at tea time, and Eleanor knelt on the gravel beside the carriage and told him that she would write him a letter, and she would tell him about the sea, and that if he was very good and learned all his Latin, he might one day come and see the sea himself. The Duke did not come down to the carriage. He stood at the window of the library and watched her go. He watched the carriage to the bend of the drive, and he watched it past the bend, and when it was out of sight, he watched the gravel for some considerable time longer. The green volume of Cowper went with her, in her small box of belongings. with the slip of paper folded inside the front cover beneath the marbled end paper. She was in Lyme Regis a year and 3 weeks. The sea was, in fact, much as she had imagined it, and also nothing like. It was greyer, it was louder. It smelt in February of weed and salt and the faint reek of fish from the cob, and she walked along the front in her grey cloak in the mornings before the girls were awake, and she thought about her father, who had liked the sea, and her brother Daniel, who had never seen it, and she did not at first think about Theodore Ashbourne, because she had set a discipline, and she meant to keep it. The discipline did not last. By March she was thinking about him every day. By May she had stopped pretending not to be. By August she had begun to be afraid that he would not write at all, that the year would pass, and there would be silence at the end of it, and that she would have made a decision she had had no right to make. She did not say any of this to Mrs. Tarrant, who was a good woman and would have asked no questions, but who would have observed the answer in Eleanor's face. She said it only to Daniel in one letter at the end of October, and Daniel, who was 15 now and proud of being trusted, wrote back to say that he was certain the Duke would write, because no man burned a settlement in front of his county for a woman he meant to forget. She kept the letter. It made her laugh. It was the first time she had laughed since she had left Ashbourne. She walked along the cob on the morning of the 2nd of January 1818 in a sharp wind, and she watched the sea, and she thought tomorrow, and she went home to Mrs. Tarrant's small house above the front, and she taught the girls their French, and she went to bed, and she did not sleep well. On the morning of the 3rd of January, a letter was brought up to her room with the post. It was on heavy paper. It was sealed in red wax, with the seal of Ashbourne pressed plainly upon it, the hand on the direction she recognized at once. He had not, in fact, written her a single line in a year, and she had not seen his writing since the day she had left, but a hand is a hand, and she knew his at sight. She opened it. It said, "Miss Hartley, a year ago this morning you left Ashbourne. I have not written. I have wished to write every day. I have kept the promise you required of me, because you required it, and for no other reason that I can give you. I am writing now to ask the question I asked you in the library on the 17th of December, 1816. I have not altered in my answer to it. I do not believe I shall. The county has, in your absence, decided that I broke an engagement I should not have made, for reasons of conscience, and the worst of the talk has passed. My aunt began to speak to me again in September. She has not forgiven me. She has merely resumed conversation, which is the form forgiveness takes in our family. Lady Caroline Whitlock was married in November to Captain Edmund Foster of the 95th at her family's estate in Hampshire. I had a letter from her in December. She is very happy. She asked after you by name and asked me to convey her good wishes if I should ever be in correspondence with you. She believes, I do not know how, since I have told no one, that you are part of why I did what I did. She is not wrong, but she is not entirely right either. I did what I did because I should not have done what I was about to do. I am only telling you of her because I think you would wish to know. The boys are well. James is reading Caesar. William has decided that William the Conqueror was, after all, a villain, and has informed his brother of this with some satisfaction. They speak of you. I have not encouraged it, but I have not discouraged it, and they have spoken of you anyway, which I take as evidence of something my solicitor would not call evidence. Eleanor, the question is the same. The answer is yours. I am at Ashbourne. I will come to you wherever you are, on whatever day you name. If your answer is no, I will accept it without protest, and I will not trouble you again, and I will be grateful for the year that you gave me, whatever you decide. If your answer is yes, write the place and the day, and I will be there. Theodore. She read it twice. She read it a third time. She put it on the small writing desk by the window. She looked out at the sea. The sea was very grey that morning, and there were 2 fishing boats at the mouth of the cob, and a gull on the windowsill of the next house, and she sat down at the desk, and she took up a sheet of Mrs. Tarrant's notepaper, and she wrote. She wrote, Lyme Regis, the 18th of January, Mrs. Tarrant's house on the front. I shall be at the cob at noon. E. She sealed it. She sent it to the post. She went down to breakfast. Mrs. Tarrant, who was a woman of 70 and who had survived a naval husband and 2 children at sea, took one look at her across the table and put down her cup and said, Miss Hartley, you will be giving me notice, I think. Eleanor said, Mrs. Tarrant. My dear, I have eyes. I have had a year of you. I have watched you carry a thing carefully, and I have not asked you what it was, because you are a private woman, and I respected it. It has arrived this morning, I take it. Eleanor said yes. Mrs. Tarrant said, Then I am very happy for you, and we will not have a fuss about it, and you will write me a letter at Christmas every year for the rest of my life. Eat your eggs. Eleanor ate her eggs. The girls came in. The day began. She did not all day allow herself to think very precisely about what was now coming towards her on a road from Derbyshire, because if she thought about it precisely, she would not be able to teach French. He came on the morning of the 18th. She was on the cob at 11:45, in her grey cloak, with her hair the colour of dark honey blowing across her face, and the sea was running high and the wind was sharp, and there were not very many people on the front because the weather was poor. She saw him before he saw her. He had come up from the inn on foot. He was in a dark greatcoat. He walked along the front and out onto the lower wall of the cob, and the wind caught his coat, and he looked in the grey morning light very much as he had looked on the path beside the lake at Ashbourne, except that he was older by a year, and so was she, and the year was between them now and around them and below them, and they were both in different ways on the other side of it. He saw her. He stopped. He walked towards her. He stopped 2 yards away, the same 2 yards she remembered from the corner of his desk, and he looked at her, and he did not speak. She said, "Your Grace." He said, "Theodore, please." She said, "Theodore." He said, "Have you an answer for me?" She said, "I have." She did not say it grandly. She did not say it at length. She had had a year to find the words, and she had found the simplest ones, and she said them now without ornament, in the place where she had asked him to send her, so that she might know her own mind. She said, "Yes." He took the 2 yards. He took her face in both his hands very carefully, as if she might object, and when she did not object he kissed her. And this kiss was not the kiss in the park at Ashbourne, which had been a kiss given by a man who had stopped refusing. This was a kiss given by a man who had waited, and the difference was every difference there was, and she felt it, and she returned it. And the wind blew her hair into both their faces, and she laughed against his mouth, and he laughed against hers, and the gulls cried over the harbour, and a man with a basket of mackerel went past them on the wall, and tactfully did not look. When he let her go, she said, "Theodore, the wind." He said, "Yes, the wind." He took her hand. He put it on his arm. They walked back along the cob towards the town, and they did not speak for 50 yards, and at the steps down to the front he said, "Where shall we be married?" She said, "Not Ashbourne, not the county, somewhere quiet." He said, "There is a village in Sussex where my mother grew up. The church is old. The vicar is a friend of mine from Oxford. We could be married there in April, with the boys and no one else." She said, "April." April. "That will do, Theodore." They were married on the 7th of April, 1818, at the Church of St. Mary's in the village of Ditchling in Sussex, in the small chapel where the Duke's mother had been baptized in 1758. The bride wore a pale green gown because she did not like white. The Duke wore his greatcoat to the church because it was cold and took it off inside. The witnesses were Mr. Whitcomb, who had ridden down from London the day before, and Mrs. Tarrant of Lyme Regis, who had come up by post-chaise with her 2 daughters, and who cried briefly during the vows, and then was annoyed with herself for crying, and refused to cry again. The boys, James, now 9, and William, now 7, sat in the front pew in matching dark blue coats and were throughout exemplary. William asked at the end whether there would be cake. There was. Lady Augusta Crewe did not come to the wedding. She had been invited. She had written in a very brief note that she could not come at present, but that she would expect to receive the new Duchess of Ashbourne at the Dower House in the autumn. Theodore read this note out to Eleanor in the carriage on the way to Sussex, and she said, "That is a great deal, Theodore." And he said, "Yes, from my aunt, it is everything." Lady Caroline Foster, formerly Whitlock, sent a long letter and a wedding present. The present was a small painting of a heron on a lake, which she had done herself. She had been a painter all her life, and her wedding present was her own work, and she had chosen the heron deliberately because Theodore had once told her, years before, that there had been a heron on the lake at Ashbourne on the morning he had understood something he could not unsay. She did not explain this in her letter. She did not need to. Theodore unwrapped the picture in the small parlour of the inn at Ditchling on the night before the wedding, and he stood with it in his hands for a long moment, and he said, "Eleanor, look." And Eleanor looked, and she did not need it explained to her either. The painting hung for the rest of their lives in the library at Ashbourne on the wall opposite the window. They came back to Ashbourne in the 2nd week of April. The household had been prepared. Mrs. Birch had assembled the staff in the hall, and they had stood in 2 lines, and the new Duchess had come up the steps on her husband's arm and had walked between them, and Mrs. Birch had curtsied, and the steward had bowed, and the housemaids had curtsied. And the second housemaid, who had been one of the two girls who had whispered on the back stairs in November of 1816, did not meet the Duchess's eye, and the Duchess did not seek hers. The story was over. The story would never be over, in some kitchens and in some drawing rooms in the county, but it was over in the hall of Ashbourne Court, and that was what mattered to the people who lived in it. The boys ran out of the schoolroom and down the stairs, and James embraced Eleanor and was then embarrassed by it, and William embraced her and was not embarrassed by anything, and Eleanor knelt in the hall in her travelling dress and held both of them for a long moment, and Mrs. Birch turned away to the door and pretended to be supervising the trunks. In the library that evening, when the house was quiet, Theodore took Eleanor by the hand and led her to the third shelf, where the Gap had stood for 1 year and 3 months. She had brought the Cowper home. She put it back on the shelf. She straightened its spine against the books on either side. The slip of paper was still inside the front cover, where she had hidden it after the night of Caroline's confession, and she did not take it out, because it belonged in the book. And the book belonged on the shelf, and the shelf belonged to the room, and the room, at last, belonged to both of them. He stood behind her. He said, "Eleanor." She said, "Theodore." He said, "Are you happy?" She thought about it. She did not answer at once because she had been trained all her life not to answer such questions quickly. Then she said, "Yes, I am happy. I will be more happy tomorrow. I expect to be more happy the day after that. We have a great deal of time, Theodore." He said, "Yes, we do." She turned. She put her hand against the front of his coat, flat above his heart, as she had once done in a cold November in the park beside the lake. She felt the wool and the linen, and the warmth of him and the beat of him, very steady, and she looked up at his face, and he looked down at hers. Outside the library, somewhere in the corridor, William was telling Mrs. Birch about the cake. Eleanor laughed very quietly. Theodore laughed too. The fire moved in the grate. A coal settled. On the third shelf, in its proper place, the green volume of Cowper held its slip of paper at the front cover and waited, as it had waited for 11 years and would wait for many more, for whoever in the house next had cause to take it down. They did not that evening take it down. They had no need.